Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and today we have our last Meta Monday of this format. It's over now. This is the last Ursa Days online weekly tournament for Pokemon Pocket in the Shining Revelry format. So it's Monday, and of course Wednesday, the next set comes out, Celestial Guardians, and I think tomorrow on Tuesday we're going to get the leaked full set list, so stay tuned for that tomorrow. Hopefully we get that. We can get that video out to you guys before the set releases on Wednesday, and then we really kind of get into, talking deck lists, metagame, and overall strategies and how the game will change. But today, we are doing Meta Monday still. We got to keep up with the metagame. I know it might not be as relevant now, considering that, the next set comes out and the format will be different on the next weekend's Ursa Days tournament. However, I do think that the information is still interesting, especially this week, because the results actually are a lot different than they were in previous weeks. So stay tuned for that, and let's get right into it. So this is the, don't forget to like the channel and subscribe, by the way. I don't want to forget to say that. We're almost at 17,000 subscribers, which is insane. So don't forget to like and subscribe. And again, just stay tuned for all of the stuff that we've got coming up here in the future. But this is the metagame tab, and the metagame tab is actually pretty standard. I think at this point, this is definitely what the typical deck lists and meta shares kind of look like. We're not going to spend too much time talking about this, but Giratina and Darkrai, massive percent of the meta share. At this point, this is the 5th tournament of this format, so Giratina and Darkrai, we can go ahead, we can kind of put a bow on it. It's the #1 deck, it's the best deck in the format. It really is sort of the defining deck list for this format, and 33, almost 34% of the meta share in this tournament, 205 out of 600 people is a lot, not gonna lie, but it didn't do necessarily as well as it has done in previous weeks here. 594 to 522, that is a 53% meta share. Gyarados, Charizard, Meowscarada, and Magnezone, Mewtwo, Giratina, Rampardos, Beedrill, Blastoise, Turbo, Arceus, Gallade. These are all of the other decks, Magnezone, Skarmory. These are all of the other decks of the format. So typically you can kind of chalk down a format to about like 8 to 10 different decks that are all like somewhat viable. There are some things here that have very low win rates. Of course, things like Gallade, things like Meowscarada, Beedrill just really aren't well positioned in the format at all, but they are sort of legacy decks that people were playing from early on, but definitely not super great. Everything else, the sample size is fairly small. Some things to note here is that Gyarados here at 82 people was under 50% win rate. However, you'll see that it definitely had a lot of representation in the standings. Charizard here as well, about a 48% win rate. We say that basically every week. It's always just a little bit below 50%. Meowscarada and Magnezone, just about 50% as well, 30 people playing it. And then everything else here, the sample sizes are a little bit too small to, really pay too much attention to. However, Magnezone and Skarmory still did well this week. It always does do well. 28 and 21, again, small sample size, but 56% win rate. So there it is. Nothing has really changed since last week in terms of the meta share and what decks people are playing. However, now let's go ahead and quickly, we're going to go through the standings. That's what this video is going to be all about. And again, we're going to approach this entire video in this meta report as sort of the final report. I mean, this is it. This is like how we're going to summarize how this format was in its entirety. So it's going to be, just about kind of the conclusion of everything right now, because like I said, this was the last tournament. Anyway, let's take a look at the standings here. And this was this was the final standings of the tournament. Kind of surprising this week, if we're being entirely honest with you. Not exactly how I expected the top of day 2 to go. We do see double Gyarados is here in the final. So first and second place were both Gyarados, Nabrix from USA, and then Benjamin from Japan, both playing Gyarados. Both went 12-1 and 1. They do have different deck lists we'll take a look at in a little bit. Giratina and Darkrai, third place from Italy, Divos, 11 and 2, and then a couple of Rampardos decks. One being Rampardos and Lucario, and one being Rampardos and Hitmonlee. So the two different ways that we can play Rampardos did actually do fairly well. Again, 4th and 5th place is interesting, and then at 6th place we do have Meowscarada, but it's actually Meowscarada with Arceus, so I believe we'll take a look in a little bit, but this is probably that Turbo Carnivine Arceus deck that's also playing Meowscarada. It's done well a couple times. It's not a bad deck list whatsoever, and if we go down here, we actually see quite a few Charizards. 1, 2, 3, 4 Charizards here in top 16, a couple more Giratina Darkrai's, and a couple more Gyaradoses. So the top of day 2 wasn't necessarily completely dominated by Giratina Darkrai. I mean, in day 2, anything can really happen. This was probably top 32 cut. Maybe it was top 64 still, I'm not sure. But really anything goes because it's single elimination bracket. And decks like Charizard, decks like Gyarados, and even Meowscarada, Rampardos, these are decks that can always win. So it's not like a big surprise, but it is actually nice to see how many different decks were kind of represented here in top 16 if you look at it, right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different like archetypes in top 16, which is pretty cool. So it's kind of fun to see. Now Gyarados did get its win here. It got its last chance victory from an Ursa Days tournament of this format. You can say it's cheating. It's the last weekend of this format, but Gyarados did finally win a tournament here in Shining Revelry. It's been one of those decks that's been really good. Not only that, but first and second place. So yeah, that's the final standings. Now let's take a look at the deck lists, and these really are, I would say, the point. Like, we're at the point now where all of the deck lists are kind of figured out for all of the different archetypes. For this particular format, things are going to change a lot next week. So I'm more excited for probably next week than, of course, we would be if this wasn't the last week of the format, but it should still be interesting to see kind of where everything kind of landed in terms of the cards that are seeing play in the deck list. So let's go ahead, let's take a look here, and then we'll talk a little bit about, the next set and the future of sort of the meta reports and things like that once we go through all of the deck lists. But let's take a look. Here's Gyarados, the #1 first place Gyarados deck list this week. And again, most of the Gyarados decks are not super different. There's not that much room to change around cards. We do see one copy of Mars here, which is a little bit different. So seemingly cutting one copy of Irida to play that one copy of Mars. Now we are also playing one Origin Form Palkia. I'm not sure if traditionally we play 2. I think we only play 1 most of the time in Gyarados, but 2 Magikarp, 2 Gyarados, 2 Manaphy, 1 Origin Form Palkia, 2 Misty, 1 Sabrina, 1 Mars, 1 Irida, 1 Red. Now, the thing with Gyarados is that you really have like that 20th card that you can kind of change around a little bit. Most people play 2 Misty, but I've seen some people play 1 copy of Misty. Most people play 2 Irida, but I've seen people play 1 copy like here. And then I've seen 2 copies of Red, right? I've seen, the copy of Mars. There is a case for Mars being extremely good, especially since in a lot of matchups, especially against like the mirror matchup or against Giratina and Darkrai, a big sort of thing is those games go really late. So 1 copy of Mars can actually be really good. It can take out that copy of Red from your opponent's hand, which is also a win condition against Gyarados. So I like 1 copy of Mars, and honestly, you can't go wrong throwing at least 1 copy of Mars in a deck list like this, especially a deck that likes to go into the late game, and Gyarados certainly does like to do that. So 1 Red, 1 Irida, 1 Mars, and we're still rocking 1 Giant Cape and 1 Rocky Helmet. Gyarados, to me, really has, like, I know it hasn't nearly won as much in a tournament setting as Giratina and Darkrai, but to be fair, like, this format for me, like, Gyarados had almost more of an impact, especially like in Master Ball Climb. I just feel like Gyarados was so strong. It never saw in tournaments at least nearly as much play as Giratina and Darkrai, but in Master Ball, it was probably the most common deck, especially like high Master Ball. I really feel like a lot of people were playing Gyarados, and I think just because the deck doesn't have a lot of downside other than just the occasional brick. And for the most part, it's just going to do what it needs to do. And I think that oftentimes it did, at least in Master Ball, it felt like you had an upper hand against Giratina and Darkrai. But I guess that wasn't always the case. And in tournaments, things are a little bit different, right? But let's take a look at the second place Gyarados list, because I remember actually liking this list a little bit better. And it's basically the same thing here, except instead of playing 1 Irida and Mars, I believe what we did here, we cut something else. We cut Sabrina. So no Sabrina, 2 Irida, 2 Misty, and 2 copies of Red. So this is a deck list that is really all about, the core strategy here and running 2 of copies of basically everything that we possibly can. We also have the Pokemon communications in here. I don't remember if it was in the last list, but I do like 1 Pokecom and Gyarados as well. So 2 copies of Red. I mean, these 2 decks, the first and second place Gyarados decks, are actually quite different. I know I was saying that there's not a lot of cards you can change out in Gyarados, but it is interesting to see just right off the bat how a deck list like this did lose to the other deck list, right, which was only running 1 copy of Red, but it did have Sabrina and it did have Mars. Those are definitely cards that are going to be really good in the mirror matchup, so I like it. I like Gyarados, and I don't like Gyarados, but I like these Gyarados lists, and I think that they're both built really well. And this is really what Gyarados kind of ended up being. It's just a deck that is really kind of foolproof. I mean, no matter what, kind of a player you are, no matter how much experience you have, no matter what your opponents are, it really just feels like Gyarados is able to kind of do the same thing all of the time. Of course, it's super strong. I knew it immediately, and I said it day one when, like, even before the set released, as soon as we got Red shown to us, and it was teased from, the day or two before the set came out, When I saw red, the supporter card, I immediately said, I was like, Gyarados is going to be crazy because now we don't have to play things like Greninja. We can just play like maximum consistency Gyarados, and then we can reliably do enough damage to take KOs, because 160 is a lot of damage, especially with a Pokemon like Gyarados, which has 180 HP. Red, it has influenced the game a lot, but one thing I would say that it's probably done more than anything is make Gyarados a lot stronger than even it was before, and it was already pretty strong. So shout out to Gyarados. Funny to see that it took really until the end here, the last day of the format, or the last weekend of the format, to go ahead and get a victory while also getting first and second place. Let's take a look here at the highest placing Giratina and Darkrai deck, which we've kind of seen time and time again. I am a little bit curious to see what they're running. And yes, okay. So this is actually, I think, going into like the 4th and 5th week, this is probably the most popular and most commonly accepted way that people are playing Giratina and Darkrai, and it really is just sort of the one of party here. I think a lot of people realize that for the most part, the matchups here, especially in the mirror matchup, you're very reliant on drawing those early researches and moving through your deck list. The game's going to go late anyway, so going ahead on card advantage, playing multiple one-of copies that are really good, of a lot of cards that are really good in different scenarios, allows us to be just extremely flexible. Giratina Darkrai, probably the most flexible deck in the format, and here what we see is one Pokemon Center Lady, one Red, one Mars, one Cyrus, one Leaf, one Sabrina, and one Team Rocket Grunt. So a lot of the stuff we've seen typically, like there's always one Sabrina, Cyrus, Red, and Pokemon Center Lady, but basically playing one Grunt and one Mars seems to be kind of the strategy. Mars and Grunt are both like opposite cards in terms of like how they provide value to the game. Sometimes Team Rocket Grunt does literally nothing, right? It's a card, it's like Misty's, right? You flip coins. Sometimes it's really, really good. It's just an RNG sort of high roll card, but sometimes it does nothing. And Mars is the opposite. Mars always provides some value. There's always a time, whether it's early game or late game, if you have Mars in your hand and your opponent has really more than 3 cards in your hand, you can choose to play Mars, and it's always going to provide value. So it's a really great consistency card, especially sort of limiting your opponent's card advantage. So playing one copy of Mars and one copy of Team Rocket Grunt kind of makes a lot of sense, and I think that a lot of people at this point in this format are playing one copy of each of those. That seemingly is the most common thing. Now, let's quickly talk a minute, and again, about Giratina and Darkrai going into the next format. I know with Rare Candy and the buffs to Stage 2 Pokemon, everyone's really high on a lot of different decks, and I think for the most part, people are just sick and tired of Giratina and Darkrai. But I don't know if it's really going to go anywhere. Now, it might not be, 35% meta share, by far the most played and best deck of next format. We don't know that yet, of course, but I do think that the deck is strong enough, it's flexible enough, and Giratina in general is useful in enough scenarios where I do think that at least some Giratina decks are going to be very relevant. Next format, they might still be the best decks of next format, but Giratina Darkrai is likely not going anywhere unless a really specific hard counter forms around this particular deck list, and then most people end up playing that. That's the only scenario where I feel like Giratina and Darkrai would kind of fall out of play. But I do think that Giratina is certainly still going to see a lot of play next format. And again, the upside to a deck list like this is that, we could cut a couple cards in here. We could change some things around. We could play 2 copies of Mars. We could play red card to counteract a lot of those rare candy decks. So this deck is really flexible, and you got to keep that in mind, is that a deck list like this can shape and shift depending on what else is popular in the metagame. If everyone is playing those rare candy decks, those stage 2 decks that rely on those combo pieces and, building up enough cards in your hand to have all of the cards you need for that combination, well, we can just kind of slot in a couple Mars or a couple red card or something like that and have a much more advantageous matchup against those Meowscarada decks or those stage 2 decks, those Charizards, things like that. So we'll have to see. I do think that both of these Pokemon, again, with the giant capes being above that 150 HP threshold, is really, really good. I think the deck just operates really consistently, so we'll have to see. Gyarados is the other one where I don't really think that Gyarados is going to go anywhere unless a hard counter, a really good hard counter develops around Gyarados, and then if that's the case, then that's the case, right? But I think the number one criteria for a new deck for the upcoming format, the number one criteria for a new deck list and a new archetype to be really good and to find its way into the metagame is for it to be really strong against the top decks of the previous format. So we kind of saw that with Giratina and Darkrai, right? The one thing that I'll say, and it did end up just being overall the best deck, but early on, Giratina and Darkrai, even with Druddigon and stuff, had a phenomenal matchup into Arceus and Dialga. You know what I mean? Like, that was like the main calling card to this deck, was that it was new and it was really good, but it just beat Arceus and Dialga, which was the top deck of last format, which really kind of let Giratina and Darkrai slide in and then just find a really comfortable top spot in the metagame because you countered the last format's best deck. And I think that was definitely really, really important to this archetype's success. So we'll have to see if anything comes in next format and is a direct counter to this deck list. I think that Meowscaradas have potential. Beedrill definitely has potential. We'll have to see exactly what comes in here, but it'll be really interesting to see if Giratina and Darkrai falls off really at all in next format. I would kind of be surprised if it fell off completely, but you never really know. But anyway, yeah, Giratina and Darkrai, it's been the #1 deck so far. It didn't win this week, but I think it won the last 3 weeks. So I think realistically, Mewtwo won week 1. And then Giratina and Darkrai won the next 3 weeks, if I remember correctly, and now Gyarados won the last week. And I think that kind of makes sense. Honestly, from a chronological perspective, that's sort of what I kind of imagine the best decks of the format to be. In that first week, I really did feel like Mewtwo and Giratina, especially before all of the other decks started to adjust for it, was definitely like the #1 deck. It carried me to Master Ball rank, and I really thought it was phenomenal. And then all of the other deck lists changed, and they got rid of Druddigon, and they maximized Giratina and Darkrai, and then it just all of a sudden had a favorable matchup against Mewtwo, and most people kind of moved to it, and then it ended up being the best deck really up until I think this week, where I really do feel high on Gyarados. I'm not going to make a tier list, and I'm not saying that Gyarados is like, better per se, but I do think that Gyarados like really deserves that spot at the very, very top. Like, I think at this point you could kind of you could probably justify putting Gyarados like in an S tier rank right now. But interestingly enough, it did win this last week of the tournament. Now, let's take a look at some Rampardos decks here. And again, I really like Rampardos. The big upside to it is that it's probably going to be still really relevant next format. I mean, Rare Candy is a card that, to me, is going to make Rampardos absolutely terrifying. We'll have to see what the best way to play it is. I kind of do like playing it with Lucario, with the Marshadows, with Sudowoodos. You could play multiple Pokemon communications, but when you take a look at these Rampardos decks, and we're going to take a look at both versions of them right now, we have to find where we can kind of remove 2 cards to slot in a couple of rare candies, right? That's going to be the real kind of calling card to this deck. We're going to kind of probably lean away from some of these sort of support ancillary Pokemon and lean a little bit more into the Rampardos itself, evolving up quickly with rare candy. But to do that, we're probably going to be pretty reliant on having things like Iono and Pokemon communications as well. So we'll have to find the best way to build the upgraded Rampardos decks next format once we get rare candy. But for right now, Lucario and Rampardos with Marshadow and Sudowoodo. This is a deck list that, again, it's running a ton of Pokemon. The only basic Pokemon we can start with is Sudowoodo, Riolu, and Marshadow, and none of those are super great. Like, Sudowoodo is definitely the best leadoff option, and Marshadow is a card we don't want to lead off with, but even if we do lead with Riolu, we can, attach, attack, and then evolve next turn, so it's not the end of the world. We also can just retreat for 1 energy from all of these Pokemon other than Sudowoodo, but if we are leading with Sudowoodo, we can just sort of stay in and do our thing. And do a bunch of damage with it. So yeah, this is an interesting version. There's 2 different ways that we can play Rampardos, and the other way is with Hitmonlee, which is just a little bit different. This is more sort of a counter play. It's more traditional, like Hitmonlee counter Gyarados box, like that we've seen previously. Hitmonlee, of course, really good against Gyarados, and then 1 copy of Farfetch'd, right? So we're not playing like any other basic Pokemon that would be a leadoff that would do like 30 damage, like the new Hitmonlee or like Hitmonchan or Sudowoodo or anything like that. We're just playing Farfetch'd because, again, if we're leading with Hitmonlee, it's still probably our best leadoff option, not even if you're leading into Gyarados, but just in general. And then Farfetch'd as well does 40 damage, and that 40 damage is a little bit relevant, especially in the face of all of these ramp decks, right? We aren't playing Giovanni, so no Giovanni, which means Farfetch'd can't KO that Manaphy in the active, but it's really not the end of the world because we would rather use Hitmonlee to KO the Magikarp on our bench. So this is more of an anti-Gyarados version of the deck list. It's a little bit more streamlined, and then we have more room for some more trainer cards. So I expect the next format with Rare Candy of Rampardos to look a little bit more similar to this. Maybe we cut the Farfetch'd, which does seem bad, but maybe we cut that Farfetch'd, maybe we cut like a giant cape, or maybe we cut something, I don't know here. And then we add a couple rare candies, and that's probably a little bit more realistic to what Rampardos will look like next format. And again, Rampardos with Hitmonlee and even more consistency going into that Rampardos, like I said, with rare candy, should make this deck really, really good against Gyarados. And if it's good enough against the other matchups, then this could definitely be a pretty significant player in pushing Gyarados back out of the format. but we'll have to see. That's all speculation for sure. And the other thing as well is like, tomorrow, if we get the full set list that gets leaked before the set releases tomorrow, we should get a full maximized understanding, I should say, of what, you know, the best decks are probably going to look like early on. Like, it's hard to make that assumption because we don't have the full set list. We've probably gotten a lot of the relevant cards, but not all of them, and we have a lot of EXs, maybe a couple trainers, and some stuff's going to be definitely really relevant. So I'm really expecting us to, tomorrow when we get that full set list, to be able to really kind of pinpoint what we think is going to be good early on based around all of the data that we see at the end of this format, but also it's just some trends that I think people are probably going to hop on with Rare Candy and when the new cards come out. But anyway, there are the Rampardos decks that got 4th and 5th place. Definitely pretty cool. Now let's take a look here. So Meowscarada, again, is a really good card, and I think a lot of people are really high on Meowscarada, especially with Rare Candy coming out with the Cry for Help attack with Sprigatito. The 2 energies and its attack cost, it is going to be very good next format, but we do not know what the best way to play it will be. Now, maybe we play it with Beedrill, or maybe we just play it with Arceus and Carnivine still, but either way, I do think Rare Candy is going to make Meowscarada a little bit better, but there's going to be sort of this inflection point. It's sort of like a seesaw, like a teeter-totter. I don't know what people call it these days, but like at some point, like the consistency of the deck by adding 2 Rare Candies could possibly not possibly outweigh like the upside to maybe using those 2 cards to play like some other Pokemon to pair with it, or some other trainer cards that provide value, things like Giovanni, like Red. So we're gonna have to find that balance of like, okay, we have this stage 2 line, and it loves to play right now with some of these other cards, but we can't play 2 Rare Candy and all of these other cards. So we have to kind of find what that perfect middle ground is for a lot of these stage 2 Pokemon, and I think Meowscarada is definitely in that awkward spot where there's a lot of different ways I think that people are going to play Meowscarada next format when Rare Candy comes out that maybe, you know, doesn't end up being the best. We'll have to see. It might take a week or 2 for us to really kind of figure that out, which I'm really interested in. But maybe we've yet to see another new sort of grass type card we can pair with it that's going to be really good, and we kind of know that. So we'll see. We'll see exactly how that goes on. But anyway, this is the sort of aggro Arceus and Meowscarada deck with Carnivine, and it really is sort of mashing 2 archetypes together. This deck list has been really interesting to me because, again, it is a bit of a high roll strategy where, you know, you're not like sort of all in anywhere here, right? We have the Carnivine lead off with the aggro. We have RCCX we can attack with. Theoretically, if this deck draws all of the cards that it needs to in the right order, it is absolutely astoundingly powerful. But because we have so many different things going on here, this is a little bit more of a deck that's kind of affected by RNG and just things not going the way you want. So it definitely can brick. It can flow in a way that isn't correct. You can lead off with Arceus, either Arceus. You can lead off with Sprigatito. You can not find your Carnivines, or you can lead Carnivine and not find your Arceuses. There's so many different scenarios where this deck just doesn't function at all the way it wants to, but if it does function the way it wants to, it is certainly one of the strongest decks in the game. So no surprise to me, really, that it did go 9-3 and that we did get at least 1 representation this week, placing super high. But yeah, it's certainly not the most consistent deck in the world. But again, it's not about consistency in tournaments. It's about, you know, getting a little bit lucky and just sort of hitting the right matchups, things like that. So it's a very strong deck. No surprise to me that it ended up doing this well. I don't see really any Meowscarada in Magnezone, I guess, down here at 19th place. We'll quickly take a look at this as well. This is the other list that I kind of have kept my eyes on because I think a lot of people are kind of maybe initially writing off Magnezone with Meowscarada into next format. And, you know, maybe that's correct, like, because Magnezone doesn't really get anything from Rare Candy, but that's not that big of a deal, right? You got to think that it's totally fine for us to not just use Rare Candy if we have Magnezone in hand, right? So maybe we kind of still play Meowscarada and Magnezone, but this deck is very limited for space, right? So it's a little bit awkward now. Maybe we play like 1 less Magnemite and 1 less Magnezone, and then we still play 2 copies of Magneton. And then we're a little bit more consistency or based, like we're a little bit more consistent in that Meowscarada line of things, but less consistent on the Magnezone line of things. But I don't know. We'll have to see. Like, I still think Meowscarada and Magnezone might be one of the strongest ways to play it next format, even though Magnezone isn't necessarily a card we're probably going to utilize with Rare Candy because we need Magneton to Volt Charge to set up Magnezone. You know what I mean? But that's totally fine because we still have the Sprigatito line. And the cool thing about pairing Magnezone with Meowscarada is that the Cry for Help attack here with Sprigatito always finds either your Floragato or your Meowscarada, so it makes that Cry for Help a lot more consistent. I still think Magnezone and Meowscarada has a lot of potential next format, even maybe more so than some of the other pairings potentially with Meowscarada. Again, I'm really interested to see how it comes out. That's sort of one of the big stories to me is we know that Meowscarada is going to get buffed with Rare Candy. We just don't know exactly how people are going to choose to play it, at least early on, but what's going to end up being the best way to play it. I think it'll all depend on really how the decks flow, how the consistency stuff lines up, and also what other decks are seeing play, right? So there's a lot of different factors there, but keep in mind, I think there's about 3 or 4 different ways that we can potentially play Meowscarada next format with Rare Candy. All of them could potentially be top tier. We'll have to see. Okay, so let's take a look at Charizard, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. But Charizard is another one here that really has kind of risen up. I mean, in Master Ball rank, I've been seeing a ton of Charizard. By the way, the season's over. Hopefully you guys hit Master Ball rank, and hopefully we were able to help you guys on the channel do that. But anyway, Charizard is interesting. It did not get a win in the Ursa Days this format. 5 weeks, no Charizard wins. I don't think it ever saw as much play as I would have maybe liked to see, but again, Gyarados with red now is a little bit scary against Charizard, and that's just the reality of it. Gyarados can hit for 160 with red with weakness. That is 180. So it makes that matchup a little bit sketchy. I don't know how the data really reflects that. I guess we could check, but for the most part, Charizard didn't nearly see as much play. I think a lot of people looking for a high roll strategy kind of just play Gyarados in this format, but Charizard's certainly really good, and you got to keep your eyes on Charizard because I do think that this is a deck list that's definitely going to be affected by Rare Candy in some way or another. I think that even just one copy of Rare Candy is going to make this deck that much better. Maybe we cut this one copy of Mars from like a deck list just like this and we play one Rare Candy, or maybe we cut like one X-Speed. I don't know. Like, we'll have to see. But Rare Candy with the Genetic Apex Crimson Storm Charizard is actually very terrifying. In fact, I'm even a little bit more scared of this particular, version of Charizard than I am the Stoke Charizard, because 200 is 200. And I think that if we eliminate all of the consistency problems that this deck has finding that Charizard and getting it out early enough, then all of a sudden, this deck is purely just reliant on flipping a couple heads with Misties, or not with Misty, with Inferno Dance Moltres. And that's kind of terrifying. I'm a little bit just afraid that this deck might just end up being too good because it's going to be even more consistent. But anyway, we'll have to see. Charizard here, it actually placed pretty well this week. I mean, one here at 7th place, one here at 9th place, one here at 12th, and one at 14th. So a lot of Charizard representation. If we go back here, I think this is just maximum consistencies Charizard. Yeah, so 2 Pokecoms, 2 Ionos, and then 2 Pokemon. That's really what this deck does kind of now, and I think that leaning into the consistency aspect is probably the best case scenario. One copy of Mars is interesting. I guess we need to play something, right? So why not play one copy of Mars? Maybe you could play a second Giant Cape. Interestingly, for sure. I know some people play the Shaman as well to counteract some of the Darkrai damage, but either way, certainly fairly interesting here. And then now this is the other Charizard, which is similar but a little different. 1 Iono and 1 Leaf, so 1 X-Speed, 1 Leaf. 1 Sabrina as well, and then we're playing just like 1/1 copies of like all of the different Charmander and Charmeleons. I'm not exactly sure why. I guess they do different things. The main downside, I think, to this Charmeleon is that you can't attack on curve, but the thing is you're never attacking on curve. You never do that, so it really doesn't matter that much. They all have the same retreat costs and the same HP, so it is like somewhat irrelevant which ones you're playing. So maybe he just decided to play all of them, because why not, right? But this is interesting, right? So we cut an X-Speed for a Leaf in the scenario where maybe we want to retreat out with Moltres, but we don't want any energies onto it. Or maybe it gives us flexibility to evolve into Charmeleon on your second turn, and then play Leaf and also still retreat. That's sort of the main, not the main, but one of the downsides to Charizard for sure is like when you do get early Sabrina'd, you either, if you don't have X-Speed, you're either forced to basically attach the energy and then retreat and not evolve that turn, or not, or if you don't have anything to retreat into, or basically you just sort of like evolve and then you're kind of stuck there. So Leaf does give you a little flexibility, but also Moltres has a retreat cost of 2 as well, so it allows us to retreat for Moltres without discarding the energies. Not sure, definitely somewhat interesting. And then 1 copy of Sabrina and then 1 Iono, probably just general use cards. There's probably certain scenarios where Mars and Sabrina are good. I don't know, I haven't really thought too much about that. I guess there's just a lot of scenarios, I suppose, where those cards are useful. So yeah, there it is. Yeah, we're probably just gonna wrap it up there, to be honest, guys. Let's scroll down a little bit. Maybe we can find something fun to take a look at. It's all standard stuff here. Here's a Greninja deck at 26th place. And Greninja's another one that I actually have my eyes on. I don't know the best way to play Greninja in this upcoming format, but one thing I am actually really interested in, and I'll probably talk about it more in tomorrow's video, is that I think a lot of people are thinking about Rare Candy as a card that's going to help us utilize stage 2 like EX Pokemon or stage 2 attacking Pokemon, and it certainly will do that, but I think one of the biggest underrated aspects of Rare Candy is how it's going to fit in a lot of these decks that are utilizing Stage 2 Pokemon as sort of support Pokemon. I did talk about it last week when I showed, Mewtwo with Gardevoir in Rare Candy, and I do think things like that are actually going to be really, really good. So, cards like Greninja aren't necessarily like the main part of your deck, right? In a deck list like this, like we have Darkrai, we have Giratina, Greninja's just there to do that extra damage, but basically now we can go into these sort of support Stage 2 Pokemon much more consistently. Like Arceus has Crobat, these Greninja decks have Greninja, Mewtwo and other Psychic decks have Gardevoir, of course, so there's a lot of those sort of support, not necessarily attacking Stage 2 Pokemon, but Stage 2 Pokemon that are going to greatly benefit from these particular, Rare Candy. They're gonna benefit particularly from Rare Candy, so it should be kind of interesting to see exactly how that goes into play. But my eyes are on Greninja because getting a turn 2 Greninja out, even if you're not attacking with it, is crazy. That's just so much early damage and a lot more consistency when it comes to the overall damage that you do. So I'm really kind of interested to see how that plays out. But yeah. All right, I mean, I'm not going to, fly through here and look at deck lists all day here. Just a quick meta report. Again, the end of this format. Shining Revelry's been an interesting one. We've kind of talked about it in summary over the last few days, but I actually like this format a lot. Everybody gets annoyed by formats, first of all, right? After 4 or 5 weeks, things are going to get figured out. Things get stale. There's only so many cards in Pokemon Pocket, so it's sort of like, you're not necessarily, things don't change that much in week 4 or 5, but in my mind, the Shining Revelry format, especially like over the first 2 or 3 weeks, was actually really, really fun. And I thought it was really diverse and it was shifting around a lot and things changed a ton. And I thought that there was a lot of decks that saw at least some shine at some point in this format, even though here at the end, it really is just about, a couple of deck lists. But over the first 2 or 3 weeks, there was a lot of different decks that were relevant and did do really well. So if I look at the format as a whole and not just a bit like a snapshot of like the last few days of it, I actually really love this format. And I thought it was super, super good, and I have high hopes for next format as well. So there it is, guys. There is our last meta report of the format. Stay tuned, because of course tomorrow, hopefully we get the full set list, and we're gonna do our set list review. And then Wednesday, the set comes out, and that's where the fun begins. And where all of the videos start to get crunched out. So definitely stay tuned for all of that. And yeah, I don't really have too much else to say. Good luck to everybody in this next Master Ball season. Hopefully my videos help when the new set comes out, but also good luck at the next Ursa Days tournament. And I'm really curious to see. Stay tuned, because next Monday, the first meta report of the new formats are always super, super interesting, because it's kind of the best place to go to get an early snapshot of the deck lists that people are playing, and that can be really useful for your early Master Ball grind as well. So yeah, keep in mind, keep all of that in mind. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Bye.